Imagine walking through the Roman Forum in 150 AD. Everywhere you look, you see marble reliefs depicting gruesome scenes, people being torn apart by wild animals, crucified upside down, and thrown into sacks with deadly creatures. It looks like a civilization obsessed with creative ways to kill people. But the truth is far more calculated than you might think. The ancient Romans weren't just randomly brutal. They had specific, methodical, and philosophically justified reasons for every twisted execution method they devised. Today, we're diving deep into the most disturbing execution practices of ancient Rome. From being sewn into sacks with wild animals to having molten gold poured down your throat, Rome was an empire where the method of your death depended entirely on your crime, and creativity in killing was considered a form of justice. Let's step into this marble empire and explore the horrifying execution realities behind the civilization that claimed to bring order to the world. Let's start with the first method that will blow your mind. What if I told you that the Romans had an execution method so psychologically twisted that it involved sewing criminals into sacks with wild animals? You've just been dragged from a Roman courtroom after being found guilty of the unthinkable, killing your own father. The crowd outside is baying for your blood, but the judge has something far worse than a quick death planned for you. You're about to become the victim of poena cruelty, and what's about to happen will haunt the nightmares of everyone who witnesses it. The preparation alone is designed to break your mind before your body dies. Roman executioners strip you completely naked and force you into a large leather sack with 4 live animals: a snarling dog, a fighting rooster, a venomous viper, and a screeching monkey. Each animal represents different aspects of your crime. The dog symbolizes shamelessness. The rooster represents aggression. The viper embodies treachery, and the monkey mocks your degradation of human dignity. The executioners sew the sack shut with you and these panicked animals trapped inside. You're in complete darkness with creatures that are just as desperate and afraid as you are. The dog is barking and snapping. The rooster is pecking and clawing. The snake is striking at anything that moves, and the monkey is shrieking in terror. The sealed sack is loaded onto a cart and transported to the nearest river, while crowds follow behind, jeering and throwing stones at the writhing leather prison. As you sink beneath the surface, you're not just drowning. You're being bitten by the snake, clawed by the terrified animals, all while your lungs burn for air in the suffocating darkness. The Romans calculated that this combination of terrors would create the ultimate purification through suffering. But here's the detail that reveals the true depths of Roman cruelty. The crowds gather along the riverbank, placing bets on how long the sack will continue moving underwater. Families bring their children to witness this moral education about respecting parents. Some spectators bring wine and food, turning your agonizing death into a riverbank picnic. The sack might move underwater for 10 or 15 minutes as you and the animals fight for survival in that leather tomb. Roman writers documented cases where spectators grew bored and left before the movement finally stopped. This wasn't random cruelty. This was official Roman law for parricide, practiced for centuries. The crime of killing your father was considered so unnatural that only the most elaborate psychological and physical torture could serve as adequate punishment and deterrent. You think modern entertainment is brutal? Let me tell you about the day Romans turned human execution into the most popular show on Earth. This brings us to our second execution method. You're a common criminal. Maybe you stole from a temple. Maybe you killed someone in a bar fight. Maybe you just said the wrong thing about the emperor. Your crime doesn't matter now, Because you're being dragged through the tunnels beneath the Colosseum, and 50,000 Romans above your head are screaming for entertainment. You're about to star in the bloodiest show on earth. Welcome to Damnatio ad Bestias, condemnation to the beasts, where human execution became intermission entertainment between gladiator fights. The engineering beneath the arena is a marvel of Roman innovation applied to systematic murder. A complex network of cages, pulleys, elevators, and trapdoors holds hundreds of starved predators. Lions from Africa, tigers from Asia, bears from the northern forests, leopards, wolves, and even exotic creatures like crocodiles and elephants. You're not just thrown to random animals. Roman executioners matched beasts to crimes with methodical precision. Murderers faced lions, thieves were mauled by bears, traitors were trampled by elephants. Some criminals were dressed as mythological figures and forced to recreate famous death scenes, adding theatrical drama to their execution. The show begins when you're pushed into the arena sand. Sometimes you're chained to a post, unable to run, forced to wait as trapdoors open and death emerges from below. Other times you're given false hope of escape, allowed to run while predators are released in carefully timed waves to extend the spectacle. The crowd participation was the most disturbing element. Spectators didn't just watch, they actively controlled your fate. They would vote on which animals to release next, whether you deserved a quick death or prolonged suffering, and how long the mauling should continue. Roman citizens would arrive early to get the best seats, bringing wine, food, and betting slips. Vendors sold programs listing each criminal's name, crime, and the specific animals chosen for their punishment. Children munched on honey cakes while watching people being devoured alive. The timing reveals the casual nature of this brutality. These executions weren't the main event. They were scheduled during lunch breaks between gladiator fights, considered light entertainment to keep crowds engaged. Human beings were literally intermission shows. But here's what truly shatters any illusion of Roman civilization: the logistics required to maintain this system. The empire maintained a vast network of animal trappers and transporters whose sole job was keeping the Colosseum supplied with fresh predators. Ships arrived regularly carrying caged lions and bears destined for the arena. The cost was enormous, equivalent to funding entire military campaigns. But Romans considered it essential to their identity. They weren't just killing criminals, they were demonstrating Roman power over both human life and the natural world. The third method on our list shows how Romans perfected the art of prolonged suffering. Think about being nailed to a cross and left to die slowly over days. Now imagine the Romans found ways to make it even worse. Standard crucifixion was just the beginning. Roman executioners developed dozens of variations designed to maximize psychological and physical torment based on your specific crime. For traitors, they crucified you upside down, causing blood to pool in your head while your lungs slowly filled with fluid. The disorientation and panic were unbearable, but death came slower because your heart had to work harder to pump blood. For blasphemers, they used X-shaped crosses that spread your limbs at unnatural angles, causing excruciating joint pain while making it impossible to lift yourself up to breathe. You'd suffocate in slow cycles, gasping for air, losing consciousness, then waking up to repeat the process. Some criminals were crucified in creative arrangements, multiple crosses in circles so victims could watch each other die, crosses at different heights to create hierarchies of suffering, or temporary removal from crosses for torture sessions before being reattached. The medical precision was calculated cruelty. Roman executioners understood exactly how to place nails to avoid major arteries, ensuring death from suffocation rather than blood loss. They knew how to position bodies to maximize pain while extending life for days. Here's the part that destroys your faith in human decency.
Roman families would bring picnic lunches to watch crucifixions, treating them as day-long entertainment events. Children were encouraged to throw stones at the dying to learn about justice and social order.
Now we're moving on to the fourth method, and this one is truly nightmarish. This is scaphism, and while it originated in Persia, Romans perfected it for the most heinous criminals. Imagine being trapped between two boats, covered in honey, and left to be slowly consumed by insects over weeks. You're about to experience the most prolonged and psychologically devastating execution method ever conceived. The setup is methodical torture. You're stripped naked and placed in a hollowed-out boat, then covered with another boat so only your head, hands, and feet are exposed. You're forced to drink milk and honey until you develop violent diarrhea, then more honey is smeared over your exposed body parts. The honey attracts every insect in the area. Flies, wasps, beetles, and ants swarm over you, laying eggs in your mouth, nose, and eyes. Your own waste attracts more insects, creating a feeding frenzy on your living flesh. The milk and honey keep you alive longer, preventing dehydration, while the insects consume you bit by bit. The psychological breakdown is the real torture. You can see and feel everything happening to your body, but can't move to stop it. The constant buzzing, crawling, and biting drives victims insane long before the physical damage kills them. Some victims would beg their executioners to be crushed by the boats instead. Roman modifications made it even worse. They positioned these torture boats in public squares so citizens could watch the slow decay, turning execution into a weeks-long public spectacle. Guards would force-feed victims to keep them alive longer, extending the suffering for maximum deterrent effect. The method was reserved for crimes against the state, sending a clear message that betraying Rome would result in the most horrifying death imaginable. If you lived in ancient Rome and your military unit fled from battle, you'd face a punishment worse than death. You'd be forced to kill your own brothers. This brings us to the fifth method, and it's arguably the most psychologically twisted. This is the story of decimation, the most psychologically devastating military punishment ever created. Picture this. You're a Roman soldier who fled from battle, and now you're standing in formation with your entire unit. Every 10th man will be beaten to death, not by enemies, but by his own brothers in arms. The process is designed to destroy unit cohesion through forced betrayal. Your century of 100 soldiers is divided into groups of 10. Each group draws lots, and whoever draws the marked stone is condemned to death. But here's the twist. His 9 companions must beat him to death with clubs and stones while the entire army watches. The psychological torture extends beyond the condemned. Imagine discovering your best friend, tentmate, or brother drew the death lot. Now you must choose between killing him yourself or being executed for refusing orders. The Romans understood this would create trauma bonds and absolute obedience through shared guilt. The method served multiple purposes. It punished cowardice while creating such psychological trauma that survivors would never flee again. Units that underwent decimation became either completely broken or fanatically loyal. There was no middle ground. The public nature amplified the horror. Other legions were forced to watch, seeing exactly what happened to units that showed cowardice. The message was clear. Death in battle was preferable to the shame and trauma of decimation. Roman commanders like Julius Caesar used decimation strategically, not just as punishment, but as psychological warfare against their own troops. The threat alone was often enough to prevent entire armies from retreating, even in hopeless situations. There was a time when Romans would wall people up alive and leave them to starve in complete darkness. Our sixth method reveals just how calculated Roman cruelty could be. This is immurement, and it shows the methodical nature of Roman justice. Imagine being sealed in a tiny chamber with just enough space to stand, knowing you'll slowly starve to death while the world continues above your head. Romans used this method for crimes that violated sacred trusts, especially Vestal virgins who broke their vows of chastity. The ritual was as horrifying as the execution. The condemned would be led to a small underground chamber barely large enough for one person. They were given a lamp, a small amount of bread and water, and a bed. Then stonemasons would wall up the entrance with blocks and mortar, sealing them in forever. The psychological terror was designed to match the crime. Vestal virgins who violated their sacred vows had betrayed Rome's relationship with the gods. Their slow death in isolation was meant to mirror the spiritual death they had caused the city through their transgression. The technical precision shows Roman engineering applied to cruelty. The chambers were built with just enough airflow to prevent quick suffocation, but not enough for comfort. The victims would survive for days or weeks, slowly weakening from hunger and thirst, while knowing no rescue was possible. The public knew exactly what was happening. Citizens could hear the condemned calling for help from underground for the first few days, then gradual silence as they weakened. The burial sites became grim reminders of what happened to those who violated sacred oaths. But here's the most disturbing aspect. Some immurement sites were built with small openings where food could be passed through, allowing the condemned to be kept alive longer at the discretion of their judges. Death became a mercy that could be extended or withheld based on political considerations.
You won't believe what Romans did to corrupt officials who stole from the empire. And finally, we reach our seventh and final method, the most symbolically twisted punishment of all. Waiting till you hear about this final execution method, being held down while molten gold is poured down your throat as punishment for greed or corruption. While more legendary than historically documented, this execution method represents Roman ideas about poetic justice. Your punishment should reflect your crime in the most literal way possible. The symbolism was perfect. If you were executed for financial corruption, bribery, or excessive greed, what better way to die than by consuming the very substance you valued above human life? The molten gold would instantly destroy your throat and internal organs, while symbolically giving you all the wealth you could ever want. The practical details are horrifying. Gold melts at over 1900 degrees Fahrenheit. Pouring it into someone's mouth would cause instant, catastrophic burns to the throat, esophagus, and stomach. Death would come quickly, but with unimaginable agony in those final seconds. Roman accounts suggest this method was reserved for the most corrupt officials: governors who stole from provinces, tax collectors who embezzled from the treasury, or merchants who cheated the state. The execution served as both punishment and warning to others in positions of financial trust. The public spectacle aspect was crucial. Witnesses would see the condemned literally consuming their ill-gotten gains, creating a powerful visual metaphor about the consequences of putting wealth above duty to Rome. Whether this method was actually used or remained a threatening legend, it demonstrates Roman thinking about justice. Punishments should be creative, symbolic, and memorable enough to deter future crimes through sheer psychological impact.
These 7 execution methods reveal the terrifying truth about Roman civilization. They didn't just kill criminals. They turned death into a calculated science of psychological warfare and public entertainment. The Romans didn't see themselves as brutal monsters. They were the most advanced civilization in the ancient world, with sophisticated law, engineering, and governance. But they also created execution methods so systematically cruel that they still shock us 2,000 years later.
What makes these practices truly disturbing isn't just their brutality, it's how methodical they were. Each method was carefully designed to match specific crimes, maximize deterrent effect, and serve as public spectacle. Romans turned human execution into entertainment, education, and social control all at once. The same empire that built the Pantheon and gave us modern legal principles also perfected the art of killing people in the most psychologically devastating ways possible. These weren't contradictory aspects of Roman civilization, they were integral parts of the same system. These execution methods remind us that any society can rationalize extreme cruelty if it serves power and order. The Romans weren't uniquely evil. They were uniquely successful at systematizing brutality and calling it justice. The next time you see a marble statue of a Roman emperor, remember, these same leaders designed execution methods that turned human death into calculated psychological warfare. That's the true legacy of Roman justice.